A pleasure to meet all at last, and here we are once again with films I should have talked about years ago. Now, I have talked a lot about certain films from the past, but I feel like something that's on the more recent side of things, like let's say the last decade or so, have yet to be talked about. So in this instance, what I'm going to do is talk a bit about something from about 2018. There's a good handful of things I have yet to speak of, even though I have spoken about certain other films like mid-90s. But welcome to Marwen, the unique story of Mark Hogenkamp and the real-life assault that took place, as well as the court trial, leading up to a unique memorabilia museum of Hogenkamp's own fantasy world that he made, a Belgian-style World War II model set that he essentially put together, along with a unique and somewhat cheesy collection of heels. But if all that's not enough, then just wait until you hear about this. The film at first takes us to a certain point where Mark Hogenkamp is seen at first inside of his own home. Some phone calls are there to let him know about the upcoming trial and the upcoming hearing that is supposed to allow for him to take a stand and face what are known as his attackers, tormentors, if you will. The reason being is because an assault had taken place, a hate crime that would actually fall under a certain act, and originally, if Hogenkamp would stand up for trial and do it properly, then these three guys would face some serious prison time. Probably for a long time, because the way they treated him was certainly not okay. However, Hogenkamp is unfortunately not quite feeling up to it, because not only did the attack cause him to become somewhat disabled for a while, but his memories are also badly damaged. So he's had some time to recuperate, but also has got to get a lot of other things situated before the hearing takes place. But even if it does take place, it unfortunately doesn't go very far. Hogenkamp would basically chicken out, forcing the judge to lay about a different date for another time. So this way, he can hopefully get his act together, and as his attorney would point out, he does need some more time to truly give the strength and the encouragement necessary in order to take a stand and recite a speech that was written out for him. In that time, however, that would come, there would actually be a lot of things that would develop. For the most part, it's actually switching back between the real world and the so-called fantasy world, which, for some reason, is in the middle of World War II. He essentially creates his own model of himself as a soldier fighting against the Nazis. And there's a lot of female characters alongside him as well. They're all wearing army uniforms. And in the midst of it all, Hogenkamp has a unique interest: high heels. Now, this is, believe it or not, seen as the reason why the attackers went after him and beat him down in the street, practically leaving him for dead. They see this as strange and sacrilegious in a way. But let's keep in mind now, the late 2010s and even this whole decade up until this point have been a huge point in history in which that certain other things have been discovered by people that just don't quite understand the full aspects of culture, and more importantly, what these certain select group of people are truly into and why they feel the need to do so. Hogenkamp himself actually explains why he's into these high heels, and the main reason why he has a big collection in his closet is actually because he's a fan of the essence. And what's even more perplexing about this, though, is that the stilettos, which are the most common that he has in his collection, they actually weren't invented until 1954, less than a decade after World War II had come to an end. But he does intertwine the high heels with his own dolls, especially himself, in these various sets that he creates. As the film basically takes us into the world of the dolls themselves, complete with some unique animation and voice acting. And I will say, they were able to get the unique physical attribution as well as the look entirely on the dolls quite accurately. They really made it look as if it were a real life thing. If you thought that Toy Story or Toy Soldiers or any of those other films that are known to create the animation surrounding these iconic play toys that would be used back in the day, well, Welcome to Marwen does take a bit of inspiration from the likes of Toy Story as well as these other things. But in its own right, I'd say it's a near perfect way to bring the sets that Hogan Cam creates to life. There's one scene in particular in which that it takes place in a bar, and Hogan Camp's own model is seen with whip marks on his back, indicating that he himself is being tortured. Specifically because of his interest in high heels and the essence he feels alongside it. The kind of self-empowerment that he gets out of it is not exactly enough to persuade or even sway off the incoming attacker's attacks. Kind of like what happened to him in real life. But this is of course just his fantasy world that he made. As he does get some moral support, not just from the in-set characters that he has alongside him in his quest to defeat the Nazis and of course gain his confidence to stand up against his real-life tormentors, Hogan Camp definitely has a lot to accomplish. I mean, he's got Nazis to beat down in the form of these toys, and he's also got a unique black car in which that these dolls will be taken in. There was even, of course, the upcoming hearing that takes place after the one that he was just in. The most important aspect here that we got to take in is just to know that Hogan Camp did request specifically to bring the dolls with him into the courtroom, but they of course were able to accommodate this under the condition that he kept them out of sight, mainly because if the tormentors were to see them, they could probably embarrass him in front of the whole courtroom itself, or probably worse. After all, where there's criminal rights, there's bound to be even more kicking down, even though they're the ones being put up for trial. So that's kind of the consequence of having criminal rights and all that stuff. But in the end, when Hogan Camp does get what he wished for, these attackers of his to be put behind bars, there actually was a museum that he would open up in dedication of his own confidence and his own story surrounding how real troubles can actually be just as hurtful as how he's depicted his own world. Fantasy and reality have their own share of pros and cons. And as this film comes to an end, we do see him in his unique black stilettos. And it sure is a known fact. There's a lot of guys I know who themselves wear unique heels almost on a daily basis. Some people wear them good and some people might not. For me though, I devote a lot of my time to work and not so much as with fashion and whatnot. Either way you look at it though, Welcome to Marwen was certainly a unique film that I feel like deserves a good score for its own entirety. It's got great animation when it comes to the doll sequences and the sets that Mark Hogan Camp creates, and with all the live action scenes intertwining, it just really brings about a world in which fantasy and reality come together to give one man all the hopes that he has in order to put real life criminals away for good. That's the kind of story that of course deserves a high score from us at least, of around 8.4 out of 10.1. So that is pretty much what I got to say about Welcome to Marwen. And with that in mind, thank you guys for watching this piece. I'll be sure to have more of this stuff later on, but let's be real. Filming in -5-degree weather kinda has its own share of pros and cons. I will say that the insulation part in this room is sort of working to its own effect, but the space heater unfortunately is not working too well. I do have to get it hooked up properly and of course test it to ensure that it works in the long term. But until that happens, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side. Not to mention, look out for any future episodes of films I should have talked about years ago.